Welcome back to the MizzouToday Show on 3 and Rivals. I'm your host, Kenny Van Doren. That's Kyle McAreavy. Did I do it, Kyle? I got it right. He gives me the nod. It's just the two of us today, like always. We're not really going to do a UMass preview. We'll get into maybe some notes from Drinkwitz's press conference and the teleconference that Kyle was just listening to here on Wednesday when we're recording. But we're going to get right into some SEC scheduling. Mizzou knows its opponents and locations from the next 4 seasons, 2026 through 2029. I'm not going to run through all of them like right away, but we'll go in season by season, Kyle, and talk about them and maybe just talk about maybe the response from some fans and some Mizzou followers as well and where things kind of stand with the next couple seasons. And of course, these aren't in order, of when these games will be. It's more just listing them now, and then you'll kind of find out the dates at a later time. So we'll start in 2026, Kyle. Texas A&M and Oklahoma at home, along with Florida, Kentucky, and Texas. I think that's a very good draw just for some of those home games. And you go on the road against Arkansas, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State. I think that's a good, fun slate of games for 2026. I mean, what have you kind of just taken from that, just on that first year with the permanent or the permanent 4 opponents kind of moving forward?
Yeah, that's definitely a fun group of games. I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway with this move to a 9-game schedule is there's not going to be a lot of boring matchups throughout the season at any point. For next year specifically, I think the home slate is pretty advantageous. Getting Texas in Columbia will be a big help. On the road at Georgia and Ole Miss are both very tough, but at Mississippi State, at Arkansas, both games that the Tigers have won recently. I think generally that's still an advantageous schedule. It's really kind of impossible to know at this point because of how much teams change year to year nowadays. But just kind of in general, that feels like it's still a pretty good schedule for the Tigers. We also know what the non-con is going to look like, and that's Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Troy, and on the road at Kansas. So generally, a fun overall schedule that I think still kind of favors a good run for the Tigers.
Next, you said 4 there. There's going to be 3 of those opponents that they'll face every year kind of moving forward. And Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. So those are the top 3 that I mentioned right there. Those are the 3 teams that they will face no matter what the next 4 seasons. The Texas A&M one was a little bit of a surprise, I think, to some. I think many were expecting that South Carolina game, especially with it being a trophy game. But I think getting Kentucky at home back in 2026 is a big one. Didn't face them this year. It was, kind of a big game, even though there wasn't a trophy for it. Both teams played up, and I think it kind of swung in both directions the last couple of years. And it was a pivotal game in 2023 for the Tigers. So I think that's a fun one to kind of get back on there. 2027, of course, you got those 3 games against Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And then after that, 3 home games, Auburn, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt, and then 3 on the road against Alabama, LSU, and South Carolina. Kyle, what from that draw kind of looks advantageous for the Tigers, but also, pretty tough because you have to go on the road to Death Valley and Baton Rouge, which you haven't done. I don't think it's happened before. I'll look it up when you start talking, and then back on the road against Alabama for the first time since 2024.
Yeah. The home slate is nice. Hosting Arkansas, hosting Alabama, Tennessee and Columbia again will be fun. I know a lot of Mizzou fans have probably been looking forward to the next time Tennessee would come out here in Vandy. But that road slate is a gauntlet. I don't know if there's many other words. Like Texas A&M and Oklahoma are both incredible atmospheres. Alabama, LSU, South Carolina are all incredibly tough games. And then again, we know kind of what the non-con is going to look like. The Tigers currently have 4 games scheduled for the non-con, hosting Illinois State and Florida Atlantic, playing at San Diego State, and then against Illinois. I'm not sure. I think they might have changed that one from a neutral site to a home game, but I'm not completely sure at the moment. So one of those will have to be bought out. It probably can't be Illinois because the part of the SEC going to the 9-game conference schedule is a guaranteed 1 Power 4 non-con game, and Illinois is the only Power 4 on there. I would expect, not expect. If I had to guess, I would say the Tigers will buy out the series against San Diego State. That's a home and home in 27 and 28, at San Diego State in 27, in Columbia in 28. You could buy out both those games, get rid of a road non-con in 27, and probably kind of lighten the load a little bit. And then that resolves the issue for 2 years, because the Tigers also have 4 non-cons already scheduled for 28 and 29.
Jim Sturk, who hasn't been the AD in a very long time, I think almost 4 or 5 years now, his fingerprints are still left all over this football schedule. Mizzou has only ever played at LSU once. It was in 2016. I have no recollection of this. I was just turned 16 years old when this game happened. I wasn't paying attention to Mizzou football, but 42-7 loss. That 2020 game during the COVID season was originally supposed to be at LSU, ended up going to Mizzou for that one, I believe in response to a hurricane. They couldn't travel down for that game, just some kind of weather. So that game ended up being in Columbia, and Mizzou, of course, coming out with a 45-41 victory. I sat on the hill for that game. That was a good one, good contest to be in the seats for, I guess, in the grass for, which many can't say this year. 2028, of course, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The only away game in that group is Arkansas. Will flip every single year. Georgia, Ole Miss, Mississippi State at home, and then Florida, Kentucky, and Texas on the road. What are your takes from that draw, Kyle?
Yeah, so it's the 3 permanent opponents, 4-year opponents, are the same as they will be in 26. Everything else is flipped, and then it's the same from 26. Generally, I think that's, I mean, we're talking about an amount of time from now that is really impossible to know. You know, I mentioned it for a year from now, 3 years from now. I have no idea what any of these teams are going to look like. But getting Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Georgia, Ole Miss all at home is helpful. Arkansas, Kentucky on the road are games that, if the teams are similar to what they are now, should be pretty winnable. At Texas would be incredibly tough. And then at Florida is always an interesting environment, even if Florida's, continues to not be great. But who knows? They seem to be on the verge of having a new coach every year and continue to not have a new coach every year. So maybe it'll still be Napier by that point.
Yeah, we're talking about players that could be contributing in this game that are still in high school or still another team right now that Mizzou fans have probably never heard of, because they're going to hit the transfer portal eventually. 2029, of course, like Kyle mentioned, it's just a inverse of 2027. So Texas A&M, Oklahoma on the road, and then Arkansas, Alabama, LSU, South Carolina at home, Auburn, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt on the road. I think that's a pretty fun schedule, with where some of those teams are trending. We'll get to see what that Oklahoma atmosphere looks like this year on the road in the SEC, how that kind of matches up. Mizzou's gone on the road to play at Texas A&M, very loud environment. They kind of ate their own words after that loss, and of course, getting Alabama, LSU, and South Carolina at home is kind of a big deal. But like you said, Kyle, I mean, we have no idea what these teams will look like. We have no idea who will be under center. I mean, there's expectations, who will be on the offense, but right now we still just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys who you could hope are the key to the Tigers by 2028 and 2029. If it's an offense of Matt Zollers and Marquise Davis and Donovan Alubade, Sean Terry, and Demarion Folks, then great. It seems kind of unlikely at this point that, all of those guys would hang around for the next 3 or 4 years. Not impossible, but just in the environment that the transfer portal has created and has continued to grow year over year, it just doesn't seem like our best course of action to predict that everyone who's a freshman at Mizzou right now is going to be a key player on the team in 2028 or 2029.
Most definitely. So I think we'll keep it here, kind of moving forward. That's a look at the SEC schedules kind of in the future. Instead of a UMass preview this week, we'll get into maybe some things from the press conference at the end of the show. But we'll touch on 3 things that went right through the first 4 games this season. A third of the way through the season, Kyle, we were leaving the stadium a little after midnight this past weekend, and you were saying, wow, I cannot believe how fast this has gone by. Already 1 game into SEC play. You get your final cupcake against UMass for your bye, and then you really open up SEC play, entirely against Alabama that following week at home. But looking at that, Kyle, Can you kind of just like walk us through maybe 3 things that went right, and then we'll do 3 things that went wrong through those first 4 games?
I think the first thing that went right so far is the run game, for sure, on offense. I mean, Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts are both fantastic running backs. Hardy, it was funny. I'll bring up a quote from the press conference a little earlier than we were planning, but Drinkwitz was asked about early Heisman buzz for Ahmad Hardy, and he said something like, well, haven't really seen any from the national guys. They're all still focused on 10 quarterbacks. So once they start looking at who the actual best player in football is, then we can start having that conversation. He's been astounding. The offensive line's been solid in the run game since that first week or two. And where to go? Mizzou's 5th in the country in rushing yards per game at 298 yards. I mean, that's insane. Obviously, the Tigers' offense has been built around that stretch run game for basically the entire time Drinkwitz and Curtis Looper have been here. Really succeeded in 2023, but this year it's absolutely what makes this team a possibly dominant unit. The run defense also going very well. You know, outside of one bad play against Louisiana, the 84-yard touchdown allowed, been a pretty dominant unit in every game. Tigers are 12th in the country at 73.2 rushing yards allowed per game. That's insane. And you take out that 84-yard rush, 1 play out of 4 games, and it's even better. So, I mean, both, you know, Drinkwitz has said multiple times when he's talking about what identity he wants his team to have, that running the ball and stopping the run are the 2 biggest things. And they've been able to do both at an incredible rate and very, very efficiently. Third, trying to decide between some of the other transfers, because I know it's easy to say that Bo Prabula has been, you know, one of the things that absolutely went right. You know, there was I'll stick with that. There was a quarterback competition coming out of fall camp. You end up kind of stuck with Bo as the winner because of Sam Horn's injury, and it's worked out fantastic. I mean, he's been excellent through 4 games. There have been some very high ups and some slight downs, but for a kid who never started a game before this season and was used as a gadget run option for the last 2 years, he's been fantastic, and his ability to throw has really shined through.
And from that too, I think you have to go with quarterback there, just because it's a guy who, you know, guy's first test SEC play, or first taste of SEC play, and I think he performed fine. I think, you know, there were some hiccups, like you mentioned, some interceptions, you know, some poor reads. You know, he had the fumble against Kansas, but the way he's responded really kind of shows you he is a, you know, veteran guy at the end of the day. He does have a lot of experience just with, you know, sitting behind quarterbacks at Penn State, but also just in that time where he did get to see the field, and he's really just proven himself as a passer too. I think that's one of the biggest things. A very precision passer too. There's a lot of passes in hookups that he had so far this season, you know, with Brett Norfleet, Joshua Manning, Daniel Blood, whoever it may be. Some of those just come to my mind when I'm thinking about those highlights. He was putting in the basket every single time. And I think that's one thing that you weren't really expecting coming in, because everything was, you know, pointing towards, oh, this guy probably has better legs than Brady Cook, which he does. But he's also a very, you know, precise passer in the way that he's kind of been able to manage this offense. So I think that's a big wrinkle to it. Before we get into defense too, I think with Ahmad Hardy, there was a little sliver of me, and I brought it up on another podcast, saying that I think there, you know, maybe some people might want to walk it back once he gets into SEC play. You know, don't expect the world from the guy, but he performed very well against South Carolina. He performed very well against Kansas, and having Jamal Roberts emerge too as an actual, you know, running threat, and not just as, you know, this really, you know, this guy with prowess as an offense, you know, as a blocker in pass protection, running game, whatever it may be. That's just another big wrinkle just to this offense, and I think that's huge. But Kyle, getting into some of the things that probably went wrong just for this team, I know there's some injuries that piled up, maybe some coverage issues. I mean, what kind of jumps out to you through these first 4 games?
Yeah, those are the big 2. First off, I mean, the injuries, you know, Sam Horn is incredibly unfortunate injury. It's worked out all right for the team because of how well Bo has played. But just feel terrible for the kid. He worked so hard to come back from from the elbow injury after suffered in baseball just to get one play, and immediately his season's over. But then you get Blake Craig, which on a kickoff up by 30 plus, I don't remember exactly what the score was at that point, tears his ACL, and you lose a guy who you were expecting pretty big things from as a kicker this season, and has really led to kind of a lack of confidence in the kicking game, which you could at this point say is another one of the things that has gone wrong overall. It's kind of just special teams in general. I'll get to that in a second, because we still have the Caden Green injury to talk about. And again, didn't turn into a major issue against South Carolina. If he has to miss Alabama and into the rest of SEC play, it could be a bigger issue. I don't know exactly how big of an issue it'll be. Javen Richardson played generally pretty well. He, I think, did one of the best things you can as an offensive lineman, and that's go basically unnoticed against South Carolina. Like he wasn't getting on the broadcast for making mistakes, which is kind of all you can ask from a guy when he didn't know he was going to start until a day before the game. If he's able to keep performing like that, then maybe the Caden Green injury isn't all that huge of a deal. You know, if it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, but we'll see. The coverage issues, for sure, big thing that's gone wrong. You know, it's hidden a little bit in the stats because Mizzou only gave up 4 passing yards to Louisiana. So if you're able to take one game and make it an incredibly dominant performance out of 4, that kind of brings the stats up a bit. But against Kansas and against South Carolina, obviously deep passing, major issue. And it got talked about in the press conference a good bit. Drinkwitz kind of diagnosed 3 or 4 specific big plays allowed against South Carolina. I'm going through and writing a story right now on that. And then Dalen Carnell kind of mentioned communication being an issue, safeties having their eyes in the backfield, maybe wanting to get a little greedy when it comes to trying to help stop the run being an issue, and that's led to some deep passes. Outside of that, I think that Mizzou's defense has been, dominant. You know, it's hard to say anything but dominant, and if the Tigers can get that deep coverage figured out, I think you could be looking at one of the better units in the country. And then for a third thing that's gone wrong, I'll give it to special teams too. There's just such a lack of confidence in Robbie Meyer from distance. I mean, Drinkwitz even told the broadcast crew that, you know, outside of the 20, they were going to have Oliver Robbins go out and kick. Didn't end up happening on the last kick of the game because the coaching staff didn't want Robbins to take his first career kick to try to seal an SEC game. And it worked out. Meyer made the kick, and he could still turn out to be fine. But obviously there's been a little shakiness there. And that's also affected the kickoffs, where we saw the Tigers had, I think, 5 drop kick kickoffs against South Carolina, specifically because of a lack of confidence in being able to just hit the kickoff out of the back of the end zone. I mean, it's one thing to do that after a penalty where you're backed up on the kickoff. It's another to have to turn to that because you're not confident that you can just force a touchback every time, which with Blake Craig, you would be confident in that and could just have him kick it out the back.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think this year as a whole really proved that Mizzou has to be a little bit better in the transfer portal, especially with a more limited group of scholarships and roster spots for specialists moving forward. Like coming into the year, you only had 3 kickers. Probably in years past, you might be a little bit closer to 4 or 5, just depending on, you know, how many spots you're really going to use. And a lot of those guys would just primarily be walk-ons. You bring in Ryder Goodwin, of course, not really in the fold as an option right now. It wasn't even brought up. That was very interesting, too. And I was listening to Drinkwitz's press conference talking about Connor Wesselman, the punter. He said, Connor just came to us and said, hey, I can do drop kicks. And they were like, what? Like, you know, like it's not something that, you know, people can just, not all punters or all kickers can do. And it turns out he can do it. He turns out he can have that wrinkle to special teams. It's definitely a unit that, you know, you want to see Eric Link take to another level, take it to a level where people don't want to talk about it. People don't want to know the punter's name, you know, every single time. They don't want to know everyone that's involved on special teams because you just want the unit to be tight and not have to worry about it. I don't think that's really going to happen this year just because with Blake Craig out. So something maybe you address really hard this offseason in the transfer portal, just trying to find it. They've tried to find, you know, competition for Blake Craig in the past and tried to find someone to come in and, be that guy that kind of pushes him to the next level. They did that this offseason with a kicker from Charlotte, but he ended up choosing Cincinnati. So it didn't really work out there. But I think maybe that's something that they kind of look at moving forward. But before, we get into maybe some other talk about this UMass game and other things that were brought up in that press conference, we're going to have a quick read from our sponsor. Well, Kyle, I told you before we got on here, I need to get my Roback sweatshirt. I feel like it's just been a tradition now that we've worn these on the show. Not as much. I think it's a little bit more intentional that we're doing this now, just because they are our sponsor, and I'm trying to get this figured out on our YouTube. There it is. If you're looking at it, join with us, watching on the YouTube, not just in the podcast format, which glad that, we have that on Spotify and Apple now. A lot of these things are back in stock. So a lot of these polos are there for you. But Roback Activewear, there's only one way to describe Roback. It's best fit for those who aren't familiar with Roback. They're completely changing the game with their incredibly comfortable activewear. Roback has released so many items with their new licensed game day collection, and it's our favorite with novel polo designs and clean hoodie and Q-zip designs for some of your favorite schools. It's definitely worth checking out. Nobody else on the market is preparing these level of custom designs with this quality of active wear. Roback's everyday shorts or their Delta Performance pants are the perfect pairing as well. They are both super comfortable, have an elastic waistband and great fabric that is made to have the performance of a nice short look, but the comfort for a day on the move. Roback has also been proudly leading the NIL charge, having signed partnerships with multiple college football stars, past and present, and are becoming the go-to brand for college athletes across the country. Use the code MIZ20 on roback.com for a generous 20% off for all new customers through the end of this week. That's RHOBACK.com. That's 20% off all performance polos, shorts, and more with code MIZ20. Kyle, before we get out of here, didn't really have too much to bring up from that press conference. I know Caleb Flagg is no longer with the program, which I think, it's a sucky thing in the end for Mizzou because he was very good depth. He came in as a walk-on, followed his brother, linebacker who came over from Miami. He came in from Houston Christian, walked on, really found an opportunity to be a guy in that secondary last year and step up when they needed depth. This year, I think even someone mentioned in the press box, hey, we haven't seen Caleb Flagg out there in a while. Drinkwitz brings it up. And it felt like very cordial from Drinkwitz as well. He said he chose to redshirt the remainder of the year, didn't want to play in a fifth game, and decided, he's going to find opportunity elsewhere. But I think he really built his stock, if he's going to play at a lower level in the group of four or a higher level in the power four or a higher level in the group of five, a group of six. I think that's a very positive thing for him and what he's kind of done with his career, boosting it in that sense. But anything else just from that press conference that we should talk about?
Yeah, with Caleb Flagg, I think you've kind of hit it on the nose. It's unfortunate for the team, but the Tigers have a lot of safeties. They brought in a lot of safeties through the transfer portal, so it's not necessarily a huge deal for the remainder of the season. And I do think it's probably best for Caleb if he's, able to find a spot where he can go get more opportunity next year. Otherwise, in the press conference, nothing's really jumping out. It was a lot of talk about, how good Ahmad Hardy's been. It was a lot of talk about the coverage issues, some talk about homecoming. I guess that's where the next thing to bring up. I don't know if we've brought up that it's homecoming. The earliest homecoming in the history of Mizzou, I found out recently. Having it be in September feels a little wild. And what I've heard around is that especially the Greek life is not super pleased with how this scheduling worked out, but there's only so much you can do because the only other home game where it's a realistic chance would be Alabama, and probably don't want to, have that tough of a matchup for homecoming. But I think that's kind of it from the press conference this week.
Yeah, it is tough. 8 home games. You have a bye week after this one. It would make the most sense maybe if you played like, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, a team, not saying they're a pushover, but a little bit closer to competition where you're not worried about losing like a game like Alabama. They've done games in the past. They played Auburn for a homecoming. That's something that, you sometimes want to line it up. They had North Texas a couple years ago, Ole Miss back in 2019, which you wouldn't do that probably today with the current Ole Miss team. Looking at UMass, though, 0-3 to start the year. Losses to Temple, 42-10. Bryant, 27-26. and then Iowa 47-7. So back-to-back Power 4 games for UMass. First year, not as an independent. Going to be in the MAC this year, so opening up MAC play on October 4th next weekend against Western Michigan. But has Mizzou is the final homecoming game for them, because this is finishing that home and home between UMass when Mizzou went up to Amherst last year. Very funny game. It'll always be very funny. But this game is at 6:30 p.m. Saturday on ESPNU and Tiger Radio Network. The fifth home game. There's only 3 more to go moving forward. Still crazy that there's 8 home games. Sometimes you really only see it get up to 7. Some schools go 6 and 6, really depending on what that non-con looks like, if they have a couple Power 4 games in there. But it's really more of so been 6 and 5 or 7 and 5 these last couple years. But Kyle, any final thoughts ahead of this game?
Yeah, I mean, UMass is. Look back to last year, that game at UMass, and it was 45-3 Mizzou. I mean, I don't think there's much to be learned about the Tigers this week. I think this is kind of a get the starters out relatively early, let the freshmen and the backups have a good amount of time, and then, get healthy as fully as you can and get ready for Alabama coming after the bye week. It's an advantageous time for a bye coming off of UMass and going into Alabama. So that's good. But yeah, I don't expect a ton from this week outside of the experience of homecoming, which I think will be fun. This is the first time I get to fully experience a Mizzou homecoming. Last year, after we took over the site, I was still covering high school games on Friday nights. So I didn't get to experience like the week leading up or Friday night or Saturday before the game. So I'm going to go try to experience as much as I can over these next couple of days and, really try to soak in what Mizzou homecoming is all about.
We'll both be there at this game. Kyle will have all your game day coverage and everything leading up to it on Mizzou Today, on3.com/sites/Mizzou Today, or just, search Mizzou Today on 3, Mizzou on 3, and you will find the site and find all of Kyle's work leading up to this game. And you can also follow him on Twitter at Kyle McAreavy. Kyle, we will see, everybody, from atop at this game. But until then, everyone have a good week, a good weekend. Enjoy homecoming, enjoy all the festivities. We will see you during the bye week. Maybe some awards planned. We'll get more into that when we see y'all then.